Hey guys, welcome to my review of the new Ty West film, Maxxxine. This is the final entry in the trilogy of horror films that he's been making with Mia Goth. The first ones were X, Pearl, and now Maxxxine. Within this trilogy, he's been exploring the different aspects of horror, with X being a slasher film, Pearl being more of a psychological character study, and Maxxxine being a giallo-inspired mystery thriller almost. It's clear that Ty West loves the genre, and I'm a big fan of his. I think my favourite film of his so far is probably The House of the Devil, which is a kind of slow burn 1970s-esque film. Ty West's passion for horror and the subgenres within are very clear and come across well, as he's able to replicate different moods, styles and themes across all of his films within his career. Maxxxine is a film which follows a kind of murder mystery. Set in the 1980s, Mia Goth's character moves away from hardcore pornography into the world of Hollywood and filmmaking. She gets a break on a sequel to a horror film that was apparently a classic or a straight-to-VHS classic back in the day, and there she's really looking for the ability to show her acting chops and grow to be a film star. And while she's trying to break into Hollywood, there is a subplot where a mysterious killer known as the Night Stalker is going around killing multiple women and starlets of the industry. There's a really great supporting cast of characters in this film as well. People like Kevin Bacon playing a really sleazy private detective, chasing down Maxxxine and causing all kinds of problems for her. Giancarlo Esposito's character as her agent is one of the best characters in the film and one of the most enjoyable presences on screen. He really dominates in the scenes that he's involved in. Mia Goth is great here too, which is expected after her performance in Pearl. I also think she's great in films like Infinity Pool, and it's clear that she's got a massive range as an actress, and the more films that she's involved in, the more interested I become. She's kind of solidified herself into the kind of Scream Queen category after this trilogy of films from Ty West, but I really think that she could also push herself into different genres down the line as well. I think I first saw her in Lars von Trier's Nymphomaniac, where she plays a character very different to Maxxxine and the characters within the Ty West trilogy. So it's great that she's got this kind of range and ability, and I'm looking forward to seeing what she can do in the future. The film itself is kind of a mishmash of lots of different genres as well, and I think that's one of my main criticisms with it. It's quite hard to understand what the film is really trying to achieve and what it's going for. It kind of flip-flops between loads of different aspects. It goes from a rather clear mystery giallo-like structure where the mysterious Night Stalker is going around killing people. There's elements of slasher which also kind of works within that giallo genre with some quite gruesome and gory effects, and the gore and the violence in this film, when it's on screen, it works really, really well, and I think it looks great as well. There's also a bit of an element of noir in there. There's a couple of musical stings that take place in the film, which really harken back to those films in the 1950s, 1940s. Although the cinematography isn't necessarily black and white and noirish in that regard, there's definitely that kind of crime mystery element as well. The two detectives in the film are played by Bobby Cannavale and Michelle Monaghan, but they're not really given much to work with, unfortunately, as they're trying to chase down the Night Stalker killer. Both of them end up kind of being just fall guys and laughable jokes, and it kind of makes sense, but from a narrative perspective, it really kind of breaks up the film. I've seen quite a lot of giallo films and think I understand the genre fairly well. I've seen pretty much all of Dario Argento's work, and I quite like that. He's very, very stylistic, and I think some of the films are great. I've seen a few of Sergio Martino's films, and I've seen a bunch of random ones, something like The Pajama Girl Case or The Iguana with the Tongue of Fire. Within the genre, most of the films kind of come across as like mystery thriller murder detective films, but the key difference between something like Maxxxine and the films of the genre is that within giallo, a lot of the characters take it upon themselves to try and work out the different mysteries, find out who the murderer is, and kind of confront them. But in Maxxxine, you have this awkward aspect where, as a character, she's rather unlikable. She's almost like an anti-hero almost. But she also doesn't show any interest in trying to solve the murder mystery that's happening within the film. It's quite unfortunate because it means that the character arc of the film is less about her growing as a character and discovering different things about what's happening and going on. It feels a bit like Ty West is kind of just putting her in different situations. It's just her doing different things, going about her Hollywood life, whilst these murders are taking place in the background. One of the other inspirations for this work is clearly the work of Brian De Palma. There's a lot of use of split screen, and the way that he films and shoots things and directs things kind of mimics that De Palma 1980s feel, and I really like that. And following on from the kind of Brian De Palma influence, there's definitely an aspect of David Lynch there. It's almost impossible for me to watch any film about the film industry set in LA and not relate it back to David Lynch's LA trilogy, specifically Mulholland Drive and Inland Empire. There are several shots within this film which remind me of Inland Empire specifically. And again, like with the film noir musical stings, there are moments within the film where you almost get this kind of Badalamenti-esque synth sound popping through, and I think those elements really show how much influence Ty West is taking. Within Maxxxine, we also have interesting flashbacks that go back to Pearl and to X, which kind of resonate within Maxxine's psyche, trying to understand as an audience whether she is the same actor, the same character, and how those themes are meant to be intricately woven or interpreted within this film. It's also quite hard to understand exactly what the filmmaker's going for, what Mia Goth's going for, and what her character's going through, when we can't really tell if these visions or flashbacks are legitimate or all inside her head. Moving on to some of the other references and feelings about the film, Maxxxine really reminded me of another film that I've seen recently called Hardcore, the Paul Schrader film, which kind of dives into the nitty-gritty world of hardcore pornography and prostitution and the way that was being produced and distributed within the 1980s. That film gives a really unique perspective, an outsider from a Christian background coming into that world and experiencing it so that the audience can go along with them. Within Maxxxine, you're kind of thrown straight into that, and it makes sense coming from the end of X, where she starts off as someone working in the porn industry and then moves through into that within LA and Hollywood. But it also almost feels like there's nothing really important to say about that. It just kind of ends up being part of her character, which is rather disappointing, because when it's explored well in films like Hardcore, it's quite an interesting thing for you to be able to think about whilst you're watching it and how it relates to all the characters on screen. Another criticism I have of the film is that the narrative being more about what Maxxxine is doing at any given moment in time, it creates this really awkward pacing issue where there's no clear through line of the plot and progression as to what the characters are doing and why. And because of this, it breaks apart a lot of what drives the film. On top of the rather meandering kind of storyline and narrative, which I've already kind of mentioned, where the film ends up, I found very disappointing. I was more than happy at the start of the film to go along with Maxxxine, see what she's doing, who she's working with, how that plot was progressing, with the mystery of the kind of Night Stalker in the background. That really held my interest for about half the film. But as we move towards the ending of the film and the reveal of who the actual killer is, it's really unfortunate because for me, the film completely falls apart. It becomes less about Maxxxine as a character and more about a kind of goofy subplot, side plot thing. Not only do we end up moving away from the kind of horror, giallo, mystery detective genre, we begin to push into a more culty, supernatural style of horror, which is hinted at the start of the film but isn't really explored until the end. And by that point, it feels a bit like you're just doing this sequence based around this genre now for that reason, rather than a logical kind of ending of to where the different characters within the film go. It's clear that Ty is going for the kind of B-movie aesthetic cliche, but it comes across as almost lazy. The reveal is quite boring and it doesn't really do much with the film after the fact. And when we get to the final act, it's shocking that that's the way that the film goes. Another thing that makes Maxxxine a little more disappointing is coming from Pearl, which I quite enjoyed. I thought there was an interesting film, an interesting character study, and Mia Goth's performance in that is really special. I think that as a film as a whole works really well, but as part of this trilogy, they've tried to expand it and it doesn't quite work. Don't get me wrong, I did like some aspects of this film. There are scenes within that work brilliantly. One in particular, when she's working with a special effects artist on doing a mould of her head, is very effective at kind of producing the claustrophobia in being covered in the kind of waxy latex liquid that's being poured over her head. One of the things I didn't like about the film is the location setting for the film Psycho. Within the film, there's a moment where Maxxxine and the woman directing the film that she's working on goes around the kind of Hollywood lots and looks at different places and sets and things like that. And they come across the set from Psycho, which is clearly the Bates Motel with the house in the background, highlighting the fact that that exists and part of the film takes place in that location. Felt like they were shoehorning those elements of horror into the film rather than using it as a nice way to progress the narrative or character within those scenes. It just felt quite disappointing to me. It's been quite interesting to kind of sit down and review this because There are elements to this film that I really enjoyed. I think that some of the gore and the violence and the splatter effects work great. I think Ty West clearly has an eye for replicating different genres of horror, and I think he's very good at that as well. Across his career, he's worked on so many different kind of subgenres that he's really nailed down the presentation. But where Maxxxine kind of disappoints me is that it's the end of this kind of trilogy that was building up to something pretty great with Pearl, and it feels like the ending of this film is such a kind of letdown narratively and thematically that it really didn't work for me. If you're a fan of Ty West and you like these kind of films that he's making, I definitely recommend going to see it. I've seen a lot of discourse online. There's a lot of people out there who love this film. There's a lot of people out there like me who felt a little bit more disappointed by it. And it's probably best for you to go and make up your own mind about it. But I do really like Ty West. I'll be there in the cinema in his next film. And I think that he's a really intriguing voice in horror cinema in general. Those are kind of my thoughts and feelings of the film. As I said, there's a couple of really great sequences and scenes within, but overall it doesn't work for me. If you've got any recommendations for other films you'd like me to review or talk about or watch, please let me know down in the comments. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. And I'm currently working on another film essay. If you're interested in film essay kind of content, I created one for Mad God a couple of weeks back, and I'm currently working on another film essay, probably around the films of Yorgos Lanthimos. So stay tuned for that, and yeah, I'll see you next time.